All right, well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining from to today's session. I want to thank you all for attending, given everything going on in the world. I'm talking live from my home office here in Kingwood, Texas, so it's an honor to be with you at the CLO Symposium. Today's session has had some minor tweaks based on the COVID-19 challenge that we have, but we're going to talk about ways to reduce turnover and engage employees. I realize this is a little bit of a different title in today's life, but the more important part is your talent strategy agile? And I think that's probably the header that probably should be out there now after we've dealt with everything. How to have an agile talent strategy. So we'll go through some information. Some of it's a bit of a mix before and after the pandemic that we're in, but we'll carry it on through and make it relevant for you. Just real quickly, my name is Brent Colescott. I'm the Senior Director of Business Strategy and Transformation for SumTotal. I've been a practitioner for close to 20 years and recently came over in the last 5 to SumTotal. I get a chance to work with customers all around the world and really advise on their strategy and see where things are happening. So it gives me a global sense in terms of where we see talent challenges operating. A lot of the macros are really consistent across the board. It's when you get into regionals, there's some nuances. But today we're going to talk about really where we can find ways to help you have an agile talent strategy and really an agile HR department given the current world that we're in. So the disclaimer is the world changed overnight, and some of the slides may bounce between yesterday, today, and what tomorrow's new normal will be. So bear with me if you can. We're going to kind of cover the current state of learning and talent, again, back and forth. I'm going to introduce to you 5 stages of maturity in a model that we have here at SumTotal. Also talk about 9 indicators based on those 5 stages, give you some actionable items, and then some benchmark information that we have based on this model. Now, before, during, and after all of this, we really do see that careers have been redefined. The ladder, climbing that ladder is no longer really a tried and true method. What we see more is movement, vertical, not so much vertical, but horizontal, whether it's changing jobs quickly through either the same organization or other organizations, but we see more of a patchwork lattice style movement. And this is where we're seeing the growth and promotions change. This plays into how we manage our talent and workforce planning. One of the things that we believe at SumTotal, and I've seen for many years in my own personal experience, is how learning and talent management really are coming together. This is where we believe there's a fusion happening of learning and talent in such a manner that we don't want to have any distance between the two. When it comes to interactions from a platform perspective, you want your learning systems and your talent systems to be seamless. You want them to have the similar navigation. You want to have just really the ability to have that goal assigned with development opportunities, see it, click on it, launch it, have it track back so that it's a seamless experience, much like what we experience in Amazon or other consumer style engagements. But let's go back first. Let's go pre-COVID-19 to talk about where we saw things in the learning and talent space. So juxtaposed to today, we saw one of the tightest labor markets ever in modern history. And this was causing us to have challenges to find talent. Everybody that you wanted to hire was already hired. And so the challenge was attracting people away from your other organizations, but also making sure that you kept them within your organization. So that was a lot of where we saw the maturity of processes and how they were related to keeping your talent the way that you wanted them, growing them. This is where we saw things just a few weeks ago, actually. And we actually had ticked down to 3.5, 3.4 unemployment here in the United States, which meant that we were trying to make sure that we were finding that talent and keeping it, like I said. But again, it was a war for talent that was more up to the point of where talent had all the cards. We're also seeing HR in the digital age, where HR really has to kind of step up and get rid of those siloed processes, really spending more time giving cloud-based platforms, more of the opportunity to use AI to free them up so that you can have almost that human aspect, more importantly, from an empathy perspective, and even more so today than before. You want to make sure you're optimized, you're efficient, so you can respond to changes in the marketplace, as we're seeing right now. But we're also seeing today's workforce in constant motion. Digital acceleration is a term that you're going to probably hear before. We've been talking about digital transformation for many, many years, and the ability to transform departments. But what we're seeing just even in the last few weeks of moving to remote work for a lot of people is this digital acceleration, and it's really disrupted models. And we're seeing the rapid rate of change forcing HR teams and entire organizations to respond to workforce in new ways. And this is going to continue to happen at an accelerated pace. So as we now move to kind of the after COVID-19, where are things going to be happening? Well, we've had kind of a model that we're seeing evolve throughout the thought leaders and the HR executives out there that business response to the pandemic is coming in 3 stages. We had really the reaction, and that was where remote work was quickly ramped up. And again, this is where if you have a mature HR organization, mature learning and talent processes, you're probably heavily digital. You're probably remote capable, mobile capable. You can extend that network. You're not relying upon individuals in certain locations or individual spreadsheet siloed kind of data information. You're pretty well extended digital. You can leverage that in a quick response in what we've seen. And so with the React, safety was in mind. That was the most important thing, to quickly move people out to quarantine situations. And so those organizations that had planned for this, that had mature processes, were able to turn much quicker than others. But we've now moved into kind of the resolve space where we all are right now. We're seeing things change. How our workforce planning is changing, how we're looking at dealing with maintaining a certain status. We're doing things like this, live from my home office for this event instead of in person that we were doing. And so we're trying to figure out what this current state of resolve is. But then as we move to the recover, what is that new normal? What are things that are going to change permanently? What are things that are going to change temporarily? Are we going to be in that similar role of where we were post 9/11, where we thought things would never be the same, and then we kind of got back to a routine? So we're going to see some things change. Workforce is definitely going to be impacted from a remote perspective. We've kind of proven out what people had said all along, was that you could be as effective from a work from home standpoint as you could be in the office. So it'll be interesting to see how a lot of that happens moving forward. But the one thing that's going to be a constant is HR is going to be in the middle of all of this. And the more HR can be efficient in those processes, the more able they are to react to the changing situations that we see in the marketplace. So a couple things. We know that a more nimble HR can be focused on the internal talent to make sure that you're meeting those needs, that you're retaining that talent, like I said before. But again, it's also important to be able to constantly organize and reorganize yourself as a department, as an organization, to align strategically to the needs of the business and the needs of the talent, and dare I say now, and the needs of the market, the needs of what is happening outside. The idea of these black swan events that we're in right now, the term black swan is going to be something that HR departments are going to have to start challenging themselves to deal with. How can we do a black swan event for our industry specific or for a broader situation like the pandemic? That's going to cause organizations to have to rethink what their business continuity process is for this, and HR is going to be in the middle of it. And then as we look at the second piece, which is to quickly redeploy the organization's talent to support those objectives. Again, this goes to how quickly were organizations able to redeploy to a remote workforce? How quickly were they able to redeploy people to other factors, such as changing up product lines? We're seeing organizations that have shifted over to developing, creating protective equipment for our healthcare professionals. A big thanks out to them right now for doing what they're doing. So we've seen so much change happen, but again, how you pivot, how you move that talent is important, and how efficient you are really is going to play into how mature your organization is with their learning and talent processes. So we look at things like how can you reduce your turnover and engage your employees? Well, that's going to kind of be that pre-COVID piece. But again, we're seeing that organizations with more mature learning and development processes with upskilling and reskilling. Now, this is going to be important for the return, the upskilling and reskilling of people because of things changing. Again, this is going to be where it's going to help you from a retention and engagement perspective of your employees. And again, this is strategic. We're thinking strategically with these models in mind, with the plan of what we have from an HR perspective being optimized. Give you a little data, but what we see is that typical HR departments spend 60% of their time on operational duties. These are the inefficient operational duties. When we look at best-in-class, highly responsive departments, they spend less than 40% of their time on these transactional tasks. So again, we're looking at ways that we can help you become more efficient through the processes that you have. You need to worry less about the transactional spreadsheets and worry more about the interactions and the ability to be strategic, to be responsive. So what we have is at Skillsoft SumTotal, a 5-stage model we've developed. We've called it the Organizational Maturity Index. And this allows organizations to actually measure where they are on a scale of 1 to 5 from a learning and talent process, so that we can help them then identify those processes that they may need to alter, change, or help move them up the maturity scale. Because what we see is business performance improves, your retention and ability to keep talent, attract talent, develop talent, and respond with talent improves as you move up the scale from the 1 to 5 that we have. We look at siloed stage 1. This is where learning and talent processes are separate. This is a lot of Microsoft Office suite running your HR department. Data is separate, culture is siloed, data is siloed, culture is not necessarily engaged. But as we move up the scale with targeted in stage 2, it's where you start to see the processes coming together. When you have learning and talent processes that are tightly woven, more seamless than anything else, you see the benefits of them. It usually has a champion in the executive suite that is saying we need to be more forward-thinking in our learning and talent processes. So we see that targeted phase happening. When organizations get to stage 3, the transforming, that's when they really start to see the benefit of learning and talent processes tied together. The data supports the challenges and needs that they have. They can be more responsive when things happen. And so we see a lot of organizations actually in the phase of moving from stage 2 to stage 3 as we worked with them. And I'll have some benchmark information towards the end of this presentation. But then as we move forward into stages 4 and 5, where we're continuous, HR is a core strategic decision maker. This is going to be something that we're going to be looking at more and more in this post-COVID-19. How strategic is HR and what is happening to maintain that business operation to really help that business survive through these black swan events? And then in stage 5, optimize, this is where basically it's a self-developing opportunity. Employees develop, they see the opportunities in front of them. The platforms support their movement, support their development needs based on real-time kind of information. A lot of AI built into that, so you can see where you are, where you want to go, and where your opportunities lie. Same thing goes for the business. The business has a better handle on who is in their organization, where their bench strength is, where their development needs are, where their opportunities are. So we really have this 5-stage model that we're now going to apply to 9 different indicators. Now, I know there's a resistance of, when I tell people don't yet pick a stage, but this is where it's going to go forward here. We're going to show you these 9 stages that we've actually mapped to the 5-stage model. So with these 9 indicators of success, we've actually taken each one of these 9 and mapped them to each one of those 5 stages that I just presented to you. So I can tell you what it looks like at a siloed, a targeted, a transforming, and an optimized session in terms of the maturity of an organization. So when we look at people-centric culture, We want to look at what does it look like from each one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 stages for an organization with their culture. How engaged are they? We've got a lot of descriptors and information around that. HR's role in people strategy. Where is HR in the business? How much role do they have in the strategy of the people and how in terms of deploying people to in workforce management? Again, this ties into where the organization sees the benefit of a strategic HR partner. When we look at organizational alignment and curation strategy, is your content aligned with the needs of the organization? Is it being developed? Is it being purchased? Is it crowdsourced? Again, we look at these different ways of things happening. User experience. Is your user experience something that draws people in? Is it seamless to the end user? Is it something that they're looking at and they see the navigation consistent? They don't have to worry about logging in. Different ways to make sure that they're engaged in that platform, that they find information quickly for productivity needs. Then we look at technology infrastructure. And this isn't not just about your servers. This is how extended are you? Do you have mobile capabilities? Do you have tablets? Is there high speed so that people can access content without any issues? Do you have a learning and talent system? Are they integrated? Are they separate? Those are maybe the key questions that we're looking at from an infrastructure perspective. Is it cloud-based? Is it separate? Hosted? How is you set up for success? Elective participation goes back closer to user experience, because if you have a solid user experience, you'll have high elective participation. But elective participation really comes down to the push versus pull that we see. Are you pushing people into the platform twice a year for that mid-year and end-of-the-year review? Or are you pushing them in for only compliance? Or are they seeking out information, development opportunities, career opportunities, where they are in the organization, how they can benefit and grow from those opportunities? That's elective participation if there's a pull, if they want more, if they see the opportunities to use it with a mobile aspect or with their tablets, or they're constantly in there finding new ways to learn things, to grow. So that's where we want high elective participation. Governance is probably one of my favorite indicators, because it really can impact all of the other 8 indicators that are out there. Governance is the ability for you to have control over your program. Have you aligned with your roles and strategies of HR from a governance perspective to know when you assign training, what that training is, who your administrators are in your systems, what naming conventions do you have, but more importantly, are you aligned as an organization as to what the objectives are for your learning and development strategies? That's the biggest piece that we see, is that people aren't necessarily aligned, and governance helps with that, because it gives you that kind of overall containment to say, this is the direction we're going, get everybody on board, make sure that people are aligned, and you can move forward then from that point. So it's an important part. Funding's always a challenge for L&D, particularly in tough times. We see L&D usually get cut. Hopefully we're not going to see that happen after this pandemic event, because I honestly believe learning and development is going to be very important moving forward. But again, funding is going to be different from business to business. There's going to be ways that you can look at how funding aligns with your organization. Is it meeting the benchmarks of the training top 125? Are we seeing different opportunities? Or are you on the lower end of the budget for where you get it? Is it coming from departments? Is it incremental spend? Is it discretionary spend? So we talk about that. And then the last one, reporting and measuring. This is where most organizations feel like they're behind the 8 ball. They're not really out there in a measuring sense. The reality is we've very few organizations that do well in the reporting and measuring of their programs. A lot of them, when they finally realize that Kirkpatrick isn't something the business wants to do, it's more about what are the metrics that the business is interested in. Is it turnover? How you reduce turnover? Is it safety? What are the metrics that are most meaningful to that organization? So again, these are 9 areas that we feel are very specific to the success of a learning and development program, to the maturity of an HR department, so that when you are mature across the board in all these areas, you are able to rapidly respond to changes in the marketplace or in situations that we're currently in. So these 9 areas we've mapped to all 5 of those stages. So, when you look at them, we'll tell you what 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is for each one of these. Consider it a matrix, essentially. Now, we have an opportunity to actually help you with this. There's a white paper that I have out there in terms of the ability for you to read all about the 5 stages, but also about our read on the talent space right now in the market. Again, this was pre-COVID-19. But the interesting part is that we have a diagnostic tool, and this is where I want to spend just a couple minutes here, is that in the diagnostic tool, we actually have it online. You can take it right now if you want to. It's at assess.skillsoft.com. That's ASSESS.skillsoft.com. And with this tool, you're actually going to go in and you're going to take a 9-question quiz. And you're going to get questions, and then the answers are going to be based on what the descriptors are for your stage of your organization. So as you read the first question, people-centric culture, you're going to be presented with 5 answers, and you pick which one is most aligned to your current state. And this is important because we do this diagnostic in a workshop form. And so generally what we want people to do is we want people to take the diagnostic to see where you are on that maturity scale. Because as you all probably saw in the 1 to 5, you were probably wanting to put your thumb on where we are. We're probably a 2 or a 3. It doesn't work that way because you're going to have indicators of those 9 that I just presented to you that are, maybe you'll have your culture is great, it's a 5, but your funding is a 2, or your user experience is a 1. It goes all over, and so we look for the average. And without a spoiler alert, essentially, I can tell you the average for most organizations that we've had take the data and take the diagnostic is around a 1.8. So we see most people are moving into the targeted phase of the maturity scale. Now, with the maturity diagnostic, we encourage you to take it. You'll go through, you'll put in some basic demographic information, and you'll see the benefit of that information here in a few slides. But you'll take the 9 questions, and then you're actually going to get an immediate output. The output is going to give you a single page per indicator, and I do have an example here on the next slide that will show you what you need to do to move up the scale. Now, the great part about this is that when you do this, it's interesting to see what everyone in your group, your team, may have different perceptions of what the progress of your organization is in these areas. The process that I go through with a workshop is where we'll actually take a team, we'll ask them to take the diagnostic individually. Everyone will take it. I can guarantee you that we've never seen any 2 answers the same when they take it individually. Then the challenge is to say, okay, let's come together as a group. And you can do this virtually, which now we're pretty much doing everything virtually. Typically, we bring people into a conference room and we say, all right, now the team is going to take the diagnostic. You're going to have to confirm with each other what the single answer is for each one of those 9. Now, I can tell you the most important part of that exercise is the agreement point. When you start to discuss where you are as an organization based on the answer, you're going to learn and hear more coming out of those discussions about where the reality is. And that is where we find the gold, is when organizations get together, discuss where they are to align themselves. When they go through the diagnostic, the sharing that happens to get to a single answer, consensus, actually creates this opportunity for people to learn more about their organization. And so when we do this, then at the end, you'll actually have a true assessment of where your organization is. And this is important because if you're not truly aligned and truly understand where your organization sits in terms of the scale of the spectrum, you're not going to be able to effectively strategize and move forward with your processes. So typically what we see is that at the end of that group exercise, the average for the organization is generally much lower than if I were to take all the individual averages and put them together. And that's the reality of where we see things. Now, given that descriptor, what you're going to see right here next, This is an example of the output, and you will get one page. So each indicator is going to give you an output. So you'll have 9 pages of just output that will show you where you are from a standpoint of if it's a people-centric culture, here's the first page that you would get. This is a descriptor of the milestones that you would see for moving into a targeted phase from being in a stage 1 to a stage 2. We give you key questions to ask. This is helpful because it helps you start to align and maybe ask those questions as to why are we doing things this way or why are we not. On a side note, I think really in this post-COVID world, we're going to see more opportunities to ask questions about processes that we did in the past and really hold them to a point of saying, how much do we really need to do today? Where do we need to be more efficient? But again, we have these key questions to ask. We'll have strategies and tools that you can then apply, and we give you resources within the slide. So it's a great opportunity to really see that you have this information. It becomes part of that output. Once you take the diagnostic, you get this output right away. So it's important that we find ways to improve and optimize our organization's HR, learning, and talent processes because people are becoming more the differentiator. Products, services are almost secondary to the people that we have in the organization that provide the innovation, provide that stellar customer service. We want to make sure they're engaged. We want to make sure they're developed. When we look at the development opportunities people want to have, it's a differentiator between maybe one company or the other. If they feel they have more opportunities to develop, they're going to stay with that organization or gravitate to it. We also want to make sure that those processes are supported in a manner that gives them that user experience that's, consumer-like. As I do these workshops with customers, we find that user experience and governance are the top 2 indicators that people find that they really need to work on that come out of these examples. And we're going to talk about where the next steps going once you kind of have done the alignment exercise work next. But as I look at the market, look at what we're challenged with, basically digitalizing HR is essential. When we look at restarting the economy, when we do finally get to that return phase in the organizations, we're seeing, and this is where I'm hearing from executive roundtables and work that I'm working with CHROs on, is that these are the top 4 initiatives that we're seeing as a return. And the more efficient, the more optimized you can be with your HR processes in dealing with these 4, the more of an advantage you'll have to be able to ramp up and return to that new normal. So we see things like sourcing, rehiring, and onboarding. Onboarding is a big topic these days because if you have had to furlough a ton of people and you're bringing them back on, there's going to be changes in the way things are happening. And you want to be more efficient in how you're doing this onboarding process. Are you going to be able to onboard a large amount of people and then not bring the rest of your organization to its knees because people aren't getting the information? They're going to start calling and asking questions of HR and IT. No, you want to make sure that you're providing them all the information they need to have up front so that that process is as seamless and smooth as possible coming back in, transitioning back into the work. Reskilling and upskilling. There's going to be changes. We're seeing workforce planning changes in the way that businesses will operate. And again, you want to make sure you have development opportunities that are readily available. You can see them in their development plans. Again, you want this to be hands-off. You want this to be more self-serve. So more mature organizations do have that self-service capability. Compliance and wellness. Again, compliance is going to be a huge piece of where we see things happening moving forward. I can almost guarantee we'll see a lot of hygiene-type compliance training as we enter businesses, what kind of safety protocols they may or may not have. So this is going to be a huge part. And then wellness. Wellness is going to be a big piece moving forward, too. Wellness programs are going to be out there in terms of what we've all had to go through. And again, I hope everybody watching this is safe and healthy. But then as we move forward, the black swan, business continuity, process, planning, again, HR is going to be in the middle of all this. You've got to be optimized so that you're not worried about doing these transactional items. You're focused on the strategic items. So as I mentioned before, when the benchmarks are seen, it's from data that we get from these diagnostics that are being put into our system. We want you to get the information, but by the same token, we're able to also provide you insight as to where we're seeing areas different industries, different size organizations, where they are on their maturity journey. So when we look at some of the benchmark data, I'll be able to provide you a little bit here. We do see that from a regional perspective, APAC is actually one of the highest in maturity. A lot of the technical consulting, IT consulting comes out of there. So their systems are optimized a lot better than we see a lot of the other regions. We look at North America, as I mentioned, the average that we see overall is a 1.8, and that skews heavily to where we see a lot of our data coming in from North America. And then EMEA usually has 1 and 2 on the lower end, 0 for an elective participation rate. So as we see this is data that we're getting in, and we really want to make sure that we're sharing this data as well, because it helps organizations realize that they're not alone, that no one's really crushing it yet. We're all still working towards becoming that more transforming role. Couple of bits of information in terms of where we see the different industry verticals lie from a benchmarking perspective, a maturity perspective. Financial services is a solid 2, manufacturing at about a 1.5, software a little over a 2, healthcare about a 1.5, energy utilities again a solid 2, and government around a 1.5. So this is the overall average of those 9 indicators on the 5-stage model that we see this. And we look at organizational size. So we've gotten regional, industry, now we've got organizational size. We can tell you, when we look at where the organizations are most mature, it's really in your 10 to 25,000 employee organization. They are on the closer to the moving into that transforming phase. We look at smaller organizations, elective participation rate, not necessarily high, but when you look at the 1 to 5,000 employees, they have a very strong people-centric culture. Measurement, elective participation rate, people-centric culture, we've again kind of made some indications of where they are based on the size of the organization. You can see that in a very, very large organization, 25,000 plus, elective participation is still very low, but they do have a high identity in terms of their culture. Now, as we've had people take the diagnostic for the last couple of years, we've curated that data, and I'm showing you some of the industry benchmarks that we're seeing, some of the regional benchmarks, but now we've got some correlative data in terms of what we see coming out of the diagnostic when people are telling us where their learning and talent processes are. Governance, as I mentioned, is my favorite, but governance has the strongest positive influence on the maturity of other indicators. I almost believe this is like the lead engine in a train. It's pulling everything else with it, so that as you have strong governance in your organization, as you're aligning your teams as to what the objectives are for your learning and development programs, as you have an identity of what you're trying to do, you've got consistency in your administration, your naming conventions, your process of pushing out content, there's a standards base around it. That's going to give you the strongest towards moving up the rest of the indicators. Technology infrastructure, least influential in terms of maturity. While it's critical to have it in some instances, it doesn't really affect that much. It's more about the planning and the programming that you have and the approach. We see more mature governance structures and organizations typically have more mature measurement practices, better end user experiences, and more defined and aligned HR role and strategy. Just makes sense. End user experience has a strong positional relationship to elective participation, which is kind of what I alluded to. The better the user experience, the more you're going to get people that are going to draw into and wanting to use that system. And then we see learning and talent ownership has a strong positive relationship with end user experiences and org culture. Meaning if you have a group that owns learning and talent for the organization, this is the challenge. Some organizations have allowed their divisions or the departments to have their own learning programs. But when you see learning and talent ownership that's consistent across the board, maybe an umbrella and a federalized kind of role, that lends itself to more consistent end user experiences. Maybe it's your platforms are much more optimized, consistent, seamless, and your org culture then supports it as well. So in terms of next steps or suggestions in terms of becoming a more mature organization, we definitely want to engage with you. The diagnostic, as I said, it's at assess.skillsoft.com. This is something you can do from an alignment perspective, the first step that you would take. So one of the first things you want to do is who needs to be in that process? Beyond yourself, who else should you engage to see where they feel the organization is? Are you truly aligned in where you believe that organization is going towards becoming a more mature organization? Take the diagnostic, as I mentioned in that workshop example, take it individually, and then take it as a team to see where things are. Most important, once you understand where you are as an organization on the maturity scale, we suggest you pick really the top 2 indicators that you feel need to have the most attention. Governance and user experience, as I indicated, are the 2 most popular when organizations finish their diagnostic. So we want to really make sure that you pick 2 that are most important, but also that you can see progress as you move them forward. And then in terms of looking at what it is, what are the elements that you need to occur to ascend? Do you need to have certain support stakeholders, an executive stakeholder to support you? What other areas? Is it funding? Is it not funding? Is it to have some technical expertise, maybe someone to help redo your homepage for your learning and talent system? What elements need to happen to move those areas forward? And then you want to make sure you review the results, identify those priority indicators and where you're going to move them forward. Put a plan together, track it. We've had some customers that say we're going to move these 2 indicators up 1 stage each year for the next 2 years. Put yourself a goal out there. Once you do that, then go ahead and agree on the review schedule that you're going to have to do this. Is it that we're going to move it up 1 stage each year for the next 2 years? If so, track it through your governance board that you would have. If governance is the first thing you want to do, that helps kind of put it all together so that you can say, these are our 2, this is our plan, this is how we're going to move them forward, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to this. So again, it's just a matter of how you plan to move your organization up the scale. When we see more mature organizations out there, we see that they're able to respond to these changing environments. And given everything that we're seeing through this pandemic event, we want to make sure that organizations do have that optimized HR learning and talent processes so that you can quickly respond, quickly deploy the people in the manner that will help your organization work through these times. That's pretty much the presentation. Generally, I like having some interaction feedback as we do the presentation. I hope to have that in some Q&A as this is being recorded, and then I will be there live when this is presented. Hope to hear from you. I hope you are all doing well through this time, and really appreciate you attending the session today. Thank you very much.